All right. Family, take a breath with me. Deep breath in. Ah, and release. How about another deep, honest breath, the kind that tells your body, I'm here. Deep breath in and release. The kind that signals to your soul, I have not abandoned myself. Because that moment of returning is what devotion really is. We think devotion is something dramatic, something mystical, something reserved for the saints and the sages. But devotion is actually very simple. It is the act of noticing when you have drifted and compassionately and lovingly coming back to God, coming back to the breath, coming back to the flame inside you that never goes out. Even when you are tired, even when you are tested, even when you are transforming so fast, you barely recognize who you were yesterday. The fire doesn't go out. We just forget where we placed the match. For the past few weeks and months, I've been in my own process of returning. Sobriety has been a teacher. Yoga has been a teacher. Devotion, most undoubtedly, has been a teacher. And life itself has been a teacher. And what I've noticed, especially recently, is that when I enter those moments of deep presence, when I reach that place of bliss or stillness or union, my brain doesn't always meet me there instantly. Sometimes it takes me through shadow corridors of old wiring, old sensations, old memories of how I used to chase ecstasy in ways that took me further from myself. And for a moment, there's a subtle longing, a flicker of the old high, a whisper of the old life. And not necessarily because I want it back, but because the brain is still rewiring itself to understand that bliss can come from presence, that ecstasy can rise from devotion, that God meets us more fully when we meet ourselves more honestly. In those moments, I've learned something important. I choose not to fight the thoughts. I choose not to indulge the thoughts, and I choose not to shame the thoughts. What I choose to do is to witness them and keep breathing myself back into devotion. And I talk about this because it's important to recognize that my old behaviors for 20 years in active addiction were wiring my brain to recognize that bliss, that presence, that freedom, that ecstasy came with a certain set of behaviors that I had to repeat consistently. And when I first started to experience this state of bliss and ecstasy, just sitting in my sadhana in the morning and just meditating, I was really confused because with that sensation, a flood of memories of the ways and means in which I used to reach that place through force came with it. And I was confused. I'm like, am I doing something wrong? Like, am I broken? Am I always going to resort to these behaviors to reach this state? But what I recognized is that what's happening is my brain is starting to reorganize itself to recognize that presence and devotion are the authentic path to those sensations. That my freedom comes from knowing myself more fully. And it's not a sign that I'm doing something wrong if these old thoughts and behaviors start to float through my mind when I'm sitting in sadhana. It's actually a sign that I'm doing something right, that my brain is starting to recognize a truth that I had denied myself for 20 years. And that, beloveds, is discipline. It's not punishment, not force, but the sacred discipline of returning. The yogic tradition says the same thing. I am the self that dwells in the heart of all beings. And this comes from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, verse 20, which means when you return to your heart, you are returning to the indwelling God within you. And devotion is simply the pathway home. It's the breadcrumbs we follow to come back to our truth. And devotion isn't a feeling. Like I said, it's a practice of returning. We've been taught that devotion is what we do when we feel spiritual, when we feel inspired, when we feel good. But real devotion begins when you feel nothing, when you're exhausted, when you're overwhelmed, when you're disappointed, when you're numb. and you say, God, I don't have much today. I don't have clarity. I don't have direction. I don't have a plan. I don't have the version of myself I used to rely on. But what I do have, I have my breath, my bare soul, and my honest heart. And I offer that. I offer me as I am in this moment fully, unapologetically. That is devotion. That moment of relinquishing control, of surrendering the need to know, of trusting that the disillusion is part of the design. This is the spiritual maturity most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Because devotion is not about intensity, not about dramatic spiritual highs or lightning bolt revelations. Devotion is about consistency. It is the quiet, steady choice to stay close to the flame, even when you feel like smoke. It is not always about fireballs of inspiration. It is about the small flame you protect with cupped hands when the wind of uncertainty are blowing hard. That's why one of my favorite, a song that has stuck with me throughout all of my life from Sunday school when I was 6 years old, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Put it under a bushel? No, I'm going to let it shine because there's that flame inside of us that is our being, that is our connection to source. It's holding that tiny light against your chest when everything around you feels dark and undefined. It's saying, I don't have the answers, but I have presence. I don't have a map, but I have surrender because I trust. I don't have clarity, but I have devotion. And devotion is not about the perfect ritual. It's about the imperfect return. It's the moment you wondered, then noticed, oh, I've wondered, and you gently come back. Throughout my years of addiction, like in and out and struggling with trying to figure out who I am, I would always wonder. And sometimes for years, I would be lost wondering until that moment of awakening when I realized I need to bring myself back. And the only way I could do that was with compassion, with loving acceptance, with presence, with breath, with community. It is the moment you feel lost, and instead of spiraling, you pause and breathe and whisper, I return. It's that moment you don't feel spiritual at all. In my early recovery, I certainly didn't feel spiritual. I felt like, fill in the blank. but you still choose to sit on the floor anyways. It was that moment when I first got sober and I was lost in Atlanta, and I could have resorted to old behavior because I had $30 in my pocket, nowhere to sleep, and I was sitting in a park on my yoga mat. But I decided to sit and meditate and pray and surrender the situation to a power greater than myself that carried me through 3 days of homelessness in Atlanta to a treatment center that saved my life. That is devotion. Devotion is trusting in the flow and bringing ourselves back to this moment when we feel lost. It's that moment you place your hand on your heart or open the window to let the sunlight in because some part of you knows that the divine is already here and just needs a little bit of attention. Devotion is not about being certain. Devotion is about being willing to stay open and willing to stay honest. Willing to stay surrendered even when your identity is liquefying and the future hasn't revealed itself yet. That is the devotion that transforms puddles into oceans and oceans into new worlds. And some of us are in a season where the present moment feels strange, unsettling. I know I certainly am, and almost too quiet. I've lived so long in survival mode, so long in hypervigilance, so long in overstimulation, so long in managing, scanning, bracing, adjusting, and just waiting for that moment when the shoe is going to drop. And when life finally hands us a moment of peace, we don't quite know what to do with it. Our nervous system has been trained to treat chaos as normal and calm as suspicious. So when peace arrives, the body whispers, oh, this is unfamiliar. Something must be wrong. This must be danger. But beloved, that voice isn't intuition. That's habituation. That's the echo of old patterns, old environments, old traumas, old survival strategies, trying to make sense of a reality our systems have not yet grown used to. And the truth is, you're not unsafe, you're healing. You are stepping out of the old architecture of crisis and into a rhythm of restoration. We are learning what it feels like to breathe without bracing, to inhabit our body without fear, to exist without scanning for the next blow. We are not in danger. We are in recovery. Peace isn't the threat, it's the medicine. And here's the thing. Healing is not only about releasing old pain. Healing is about learning to receive what was once unavailable. Peace must be learned. Safety must be learned. Joy must be learned. Being held must be learned. And this is where devotion becomes essential. Devotion is how we retrain ourselves to tolerate peace, to tolerate goodness, to tolerate joy without shrinking, tolerate stillness without spiraling, tolerate being held by something larger than us. Devotion teaches the nervous system you are allowed to arrive. You are allowed to stay, and you are safe now. And this is why the psalmist wrote, "Be still and know that I am God." Psalm 46:10. This isn't a command to sit quietly. It is an invitation to let your body finally recognize that stillness is not abandonment. Stillness is communion. It is an invitation to recognize that silence doesn't mean danger. It means God is near. It's also an invitation to understand that peace is not a void. It is presence, divine presence. And devotion, returning your attention to the sacred again and again, is what trains your inner world to trust that presence. Devotion is what teaches your body that peace is safe, love is safe, breath is safe, and you are safe. Devotion is the daily whisper to your nervous system. You can unclench now. You can soften. It's safe to arrive. Now, some of us are stepping into bigger roles of service. Our voice is stretching, our influence is widening, our calling is amplifying, our capacity is evolving. And with that expansion comes a familiar temptation to lead from performance instead of presence, to curate your image instead of tending your inner altar, to sound wise instead of staying surrendered, to appear confident instead of staying connected, to behave like a spiritual leader instead of simply being one. But hear me clearly, you are not here to perform spirituality. You are here to embody it. You are here to walk it, breathe it, sweat it, cry it, and let your life become the message. Leadership in the new world, the world we are co-creating together, is not built on charisma or perfection. It's built on alignment. It's built on devotion. It is built on a heart that keeps returning to the one within. Because your people, whether they are children, your community, your team, your students, your clients, your partners, do not need you to be flawless. They do not need you to have all the answers. Certainly not, because I don't have all the answers. They do not need you to sparkle and shine every moment of every day. They need you to be devoted. They need to see someone who knows how to come home to themselves after getting knocked off center. Someone who can apologize, recenter, breathe, and find God again in the middle of all the mess. They need to see you returning to your flame again and again, tending your flame, so they know it's possible for them too. Because when they watch you return, they learn how to return themselves. When they see you breathe, they remember their own breath. When they see you stay, they learn that they can stay. This is leadership by transmission. Leadership by embodiment, leadership by presence. In contrast, leadership without devotion, leadership built on image, ego, and performance, which we have lots of examples of that, just turn on the news, always collapses. It burns out, it fractures, it weakens from the inside because it has no internal altar, only external scaffolding. But leadership with devotion, which we definitely are in the calling that in, give me more leadership with devotion, becomes a lighthouse. It doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. It doesn't have to be dramatic or to be impactful. It simply stands in its own light and offers a signal of home to every soul who has forgotten they have a home within themselves. So when we lead from devotion, our presence becomes medicine. Our life becomes scripture. Our flame becomes a map for everyone else watching. And this is the leadership the world is starving for. Not performative, but embodied. Not polished, but true. Not postured, but present. This is the leadership devotion births. So what does devotion look like for the average person? I want to make something clear. Devotion is not reserved for monks, mystics, pastors, yogis, or people who appear spiritual. Devotion is for absolutely everyone. And for the average person, devotion rarely looks like incense and chanting and long hours of meditation. Most of the time, devotion looks beautifully and fantastically and extraordinarily ordinary. It looks like small, holy choices. Devotion is that moment we pause instead of react. When we're triggered by a partner, a child, a coworker, a family member, and something in us says, breathe before we speak. That breath is devotion. Devotion is choosing honesty with ourselves. When we admit, I'm overwhelmed, I'm afraid, I don't know, we are practicing devotion. And that truth opens the door for God, creates space within us for the divine. And devotion is showing up even when we don't feel like it. Relate to this. Not to perform, not to impress, but because our soul is asking for consistency. This is what the psalmist meant by a steadfast heart. Devotion is the small daily rhythm that keeps us aligned. For some, devotion is 3 deep breaths before getting out of bed. Gratitude is just tough to do while washing the dishes. Sometimes they bounce back and forth. Sometimes I want to wash them. Sometimes not. More often than not, I don't want to wash them. Walking the dog and paying attention to the sky. Lighting a candle before answering a difficult email. And saying, God, guide me before a tough conversation. These tiny acts of remembering become the architecture of our inner temple. Devotion is the courage to course correct. When we drift and we notice it, and when we gently bring ourselves back, that is devotion. It doesn't matter if we drifted for 2 minutes, 2 months, 2 years, we always return. Devotion is pleasure, joy, and beauty. Taking a walk at sunset, making a meal with intention, playing music that opens our heart, and laughing fully, allowing ourselves to feel alive. The Upanishads call this seeing God in all things. Devotion is choosing love in difficult moments. Not the sentimental kind, but the courageous kind, the love that reaches across differences, the love that forgives, the love that listens, the love that stays present. This is what Jesus meant when he said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be. Matthew 6:21. Devotion is where you choose to place your heart. So most people don't need a mountaintop or a monastery. Most people need a moment. A moment. Most people need a moment. Just one moment each day where they remember who they are and who they belong to. Devotion is presence. Devotion is attention. Devotion is the willingness to live awake in a world that numbs. This is devotion for the everyday soul. So I want to invite you into a simple practice this week. Nothing complicated, nothing mystical, just presence. 3 times a day, in the morning, in the middle of the day, and at night, pause for 20 or 30 seconds. And if you need to, start a timer on your phone for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and put a hand on your heart and one on your belly and whisper, I return. I return. I return to the flame within me. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. So no matter how you feel, no matter where your mind has been, no matter what you are carrying, this is devotion. Not perfection, presence. Not performance, practice. So I want to hear from you all next week when we do our parking lot at the end of our service next week to see how that went 3 times a day. And if you want, set a timer on your phone to remind you at 3 different intervals in the day. It takes 30 seconds. And that is building that devotion. That is coming home to yourself. That is letting yourself know, I love me today. And I surrender and I am here to be of service. So as we close, let us close with breath. Inhale, receive the flame, and exhale, return to it. May you remember that you are never far from God. May you feel that nearness of your own soul. May you walk this week with the discipline of a devoted heart. May your breath lead you back again and again and again. And may you trust that every time you return, you are written and rewritten by light. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Guru Om, Amen, Aho, Ashe, and so it is. To carry us deeper into that presence, I'll invite Christopher to guide us into meditation.